On the riverbanks by the boats, in the shadow of the sultry forest, in the shadow of the fig tree, here grew Siddhartha, the handsome Brahmin's son, with his ever loyal friend Govinda. The sun on the riverbank browned his pale shoulders as he bathed, as he performed sacred sacrifices. Shadows flowed in his dark eyes in the mango grove as he played his boys' games. Siddhartha had taken part in the discourses of the wise men, training in debate with Govinda, in the art of contemplation and meditative absorption. He already knew how to say Om without uttering a sound, with his breath, with his mind collected. He already knew how to see his Atma within him, indestructible and one with the universe. Joy lived in his father's heart over his brilliant son. Bliss lived in his mother's breast as she watched him, and love stirred in the hearts of the young Brahmin daughters when Siddhartha passed through the city streets with his imperial glance. But his best friend Govinda loved him more than any other. While Siddhartha was a joy to everyone, he brought no pleasure to himself. He had begun to breed discontent within himself. He began to sense that in spite of all the wisdom that was shared with him by his father and the other venerable scholars, his mind was not satisfied, his soul was not at peace, and his heart was not content. One day, some Shamanas, knowledge seeking ascetics, passed through Siddhartha's city. Three gaunt, lifeless men, nearly naked, sun scorched, alien and outcast, misfits of the human world. After an hour of contemplation in the evening, Siddhartha told Govinda his decision to become a Shramana and join the three misfits. He decided to ask his father's permission for this journey. Though reluctant to part with his only son, seeing the unwavering resilience in his son's eyes, Siddhartha's father agrees to his request to join the Shamanas. As he leaves the next day, a shadow emerges from behind the last house, none other than his own lifelong shadow, his best friend Govinda. Leaving all his earthly belongings, Siddhartha, along with his best friend Govinda, joined the Shamanas. He fasted for 28 days. Flesh fell away from his bones, and he became hard as iron. He saw merchants bargaining, princes going off on hunts, people mourning their dead, prostitutes offering their bodies, mothers nursing their babies, and lovers making love. Yet he saw nothing, felt nothing. It was all a lie. Only putrescence and decay existed. He only had one goal, to become empty. Empty of joy, empty of thirst, empty of desire, joy, and sorrow. To have no ego. Siddhartha practiced with the eldest Shramana. He learned self-application and meditative absorption. He trained his ego to leave his body in 1,000 different forms. Yet he was never empty of it. He always found it when he awoke. He suffered from thirst, and his long path of the Shamanas did not lessen his thirst one bit. Slowly, a rumor, a legend, began spreading among the Shamanas about a man named Gautama, an exalted one, a Buddha, one who had overcome within himself the suffering of the world and brought the wheel of rebirth to a standstill. According to believers, he was possessed of supreme knowledge. He remembered his previous lives, had attained nirvana and never returned to the cycle of existence, was never swallowed back into the troubled stream of formations. He had performed miracles, subdued the devil, and spoken with the gods. The legend reached the ears of Siddhartha and Govinda expressed his desire of meeting the perfect one, the Buddha, to Siddhartha. Siddhartha and Govinda reached the city of Shravasti, where every child knew the legend of the Buddha. Near the city lay the Jeta Grove, Gautama's favorite place to be with his followers. Here in Jeta Grove, they saw the Buddha. He went his way humbly, absorbed in thought. His quiet face, neither happy nor sad. It gave the impression of a slight inward smile, like that of a child's. But his face and gait, his still lowered gaze, his still loose hanging hand, and every finger on his hand were expressions of peace, of perfection. This man, this Buddha, was in truth who he was, even in the movements of his little fingers. This man was holy. Never had Siddhartha so venerated anyone. Never had he loved a person as he loved this one. Gautama taught the teaching of suffering, the origin of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering. His quiet discourse flowed calm and clear. Life was suffering, but liberation from suffering had been found. He who followed the path of the Buddha attained liberation. When Gautama ended his talk, it was night, and many who had listened to him came forward to be accepted into his community of sadhus. The shy Govinda also stepped forward. Govinda announces his decision happily to Siddhartha, but he is shocked to hear that Siddhartha does not intend to join the Buddha. He says softly, Govinda, my friend, now you have taken the step, you have chosen your path. Always, Govinda, you have been my friend, and always you have been a step behind me. Often I thought, is Govinda ever going to take a step on his own, without me, acting from his own heart? And there it is. Now you have become a man and have chosen your path. May you follow it to its end, my friend. May you attain liberation. Govinda pulled himself away from his childhood friend, embracing him one more time, and joined the procession of the neophytes. Separated from Govinda for the first time in his life, Siddhartha roamed through the grove, where he encountered Gautama, the Buddha. He asked Gautama permission to address him, and the Buddha nods his assent. He tells Gautama how while his friend Govinda has decided to take refuge in Gautama, Siddhartha himself is unable to do so. He feels that nobody has or ever will attain enlightenment through teaching. While the Buddha can teach him, he will not be able to express to anyone through words or doctrine what exactly happened to him in the moment of his enlightenment. And this is the reason why he is going to continue his wandering, not in search of a better teacher, but to leave all teachings behind and to attain his goal or die. The Buddha blesses him while warning him about his excessively clever mind. Siddhartha feels that while he has lost his shadow, his best friend to Gautama, he got even more. He got himself.
For the first time in many years, Siddhartha saw the world in a different light. He saw the physical world, he saw the streams, the rivers, the animals, the moon. For the first time, he appreciated the beauty of this world, with the eyes of a child, without any inquisitiveness of finding something beyond. He saw the world for what it was. He saw and acknowledged the visible, sought his home in this world. This world was always a companion in his journey. He realized he had failed to notice it, but now he was a part of it. As he traveled, he recalled his meeting with the Divine One, Buddha. What a fool Siddhartha was to question Buddha's teachings, when he himself did not understand what he was talking about. It was in his wake in the forest that he had his first encounter with the ferryman Vasudeva, who took him across the river for no compensation and said, as if he were making a promise, that Siddhartha will come back to the river. He thought the ferryman too kind and like Govinda, who would be happy to be his friend and follow him around like many other people. He thought people are children. On this side of the river, not far from the forest, was a city where Siddhartha had his first encounter with Kamla, a courtesan, who was being carried in her palanquin. Siddhartha was enchanted. When peeking from her palanquin, she gave him a seductive smile, crossing him on the pathway. Enchanted, Siddhartha sought Kamla in the city. For the first time in his life, Siddhartha was attracted to the opposite gender. It invoked in him a desire to experience pleasure. It awakened his sexuality. And so he sought Kamla. For a meeting with Kamla, he lets go of his Shramana days. Pride flares within him. He is no longer a Shramana. It doesn't fit him to beg anymore. Now he wants to portray himself as an attractive sexual partner to Kamla. After a rendezvous with her, he asks her to teach him the art of love. But she refuses to be his lover unless he makes something of himself, earns enough to shower her with gifts and materialism. She questions what can he do to earn money. He answers, I can think, I can wait, I can fast. Kamla responds by saying those are not the skills that will earn you money. She further probes what more can he do, and finally she settles on the fact that Siddhartha can read and write, which are skills not many in the city possessed. And so she directs him to Kamaswami, the city's richest merchant. Kamla had advised Siddhartha not to be beneath Kamaswami, but to behave as if he were his equal. Siddhartha heeds to her advice and portrays himself as an equal. Kamaswami questions whether he is in need to seek service. Siddhartha is clever here and prideful. He says, I am not in need of anything. A bemused Kamaswami questions again, are you not a Shramana? Aren't Shramanas without possessions? How do you survive without possessions? Siddhartha answers in the same fashion he did to Kamla. He says, he can think, he can wait, he can fast. He explains if he did not learn to fast, then today he would have had to take on any work at all, because hunger would force him to do so. But he can fast. He knows no impatience. He can do so while laughing, and that is what fasting is good for. Kamaswami, impressed by his answer, takes a quick test of his reading and writing skills, invites him to live in his house, takes him under as an apprentice, and it's not long before Siddhartha learns his own way around the merchant's business. But Siddhartha is not a true businessman, nor is he invested in making profits. He was merely toying with the business. As Kamaswami put forth, he is no real merchant, nor can he ever be one. He is a man to whom fortune comes easily. But this is also what worried Kamaswami. Siddhartha was not concerned about making profits, neither was he worried about the losses. Perhaps this indifference in his attitude was what attracted the city's people to him. He was an enigma to them. They came to him with their problems, with their sorrows, and for money. Over the years, Siddhartha had become rich. He possessed all the worldly possessions. He had servants, he had a house, and soon enough the worldly pleasures caught up to him. He had immersed himself in a life of gambling, drinking, and pleasure. The world had caught him. Pleasure, greed, and indifference, and the vice he had most despised, the craving for possessions. The only solace in this worldly life would be the time he spent with Kamla, who he claimed knew him better than anyone. Siddhartha had lost his greatest possessions. He had lost the ability to fast, lost his patience, and he had not been thinking while living the worldly life. One day, when Kamla questions him about Gautama and expresses her desire to see him, her desire to take refuge in his teachings, did Siddhartha realize he had become a slave to this materialistic world. He had become another Kamaswami. He suddenly felt trapped like Kamla's rare songbird in the cage of gold. In a grim state, he felt himself dying inside. He recalled his past self and what had become of him today. He had an epiphany. He decided to end this game, said goodbye to the city and his possessions, never to return again. When Kamla learns of his departure, she sets the songbird free. After all, did she not always know that he would leave one day? Soon after his departure, she realizes she was pregnant with his child. Siddhartha returns to the riverside from where he had first ventured into the city. He knew only one thing, that he could not go back. He suffered inside. He wished for death. Just then, from his past outworn life, came a sound of the sacred Om. The moment the sound of Om reached his ears, he struck with fear. He was so lost, so confused and forsaken by all wisdom, that he had been able to seek death. He decided to sleep at the foot of a coconut tree, only to wake and find a monk in a yellow robe sitting beside him. He had been sitting alongside him for a while, waiting for him to wake up. On careful inspection, Siddhartha realizes that the monk is no one but his old companion Govinda. But alas, Govinda did not recognize him. Only after Siddhartha addresses him by his name does Govinda realize he is Siddhartha, his old friend. He questions if Siddhartha is a wanderer himself. What is he doing adorning the clothes of the rich? Few more words are spoken between them, and they depart to their own paths. I already understood as a child that the pleasures of the world and wealth are not good things. I understood that long ago, but I have only just now experienced it, said Siddhartha. I will stay by this river, he decides. Driven by hunger, he wanders the path of the riverside, where he encounters the ferryman Vasudeva once again. Even Vasudeva did not recognize him. He recites to Vasudeva about their last encounter and asks him to take him under his wing as a helper or as an apprentice, to allow him to live with him in his hut. In the evening, sitting on a tree trunk by the river, Siddhartha tells him about his origins and his life. In the end, he tells him how deeply he felt about the river after his sleep by the foot of the coconut tree. Vasudeva spoke. It is as I thought, the river spoke to you, as it does to him, and the ferryman decides to let him stay with him in his hut. They live together in friendship, and Siddhartha learns from the wisdom of the river. He often discusses with Vasudeva what he learned from the river. Vasudeva, a man of few words, always encourages him to learn as much as possible from the river. They learned from the river together. Years went past, and suddenly, one fine day, the traffic for going across the river increased, and through the travelers they learned that the exalted one, Buddha, was dying, and everyone wanted to see him once or one last time before he enters into liberation. Profoundly and with a smile, he thought of the man, of the proud and precocious words he had spoken to him. The news had reached Kamala as well, who had been harboring the desire to see the exalted one for a long time, and with her son in tow, she sets out on the journey to see Buddha. But suddenly, a scream emitted from Kamala's throat as she realized a snake had bitten her. Little Siddhartha, distraught by his mother's condition, began crying. Driven by the sound of crying, Vasudeva quickly took the both of them across the river and to his hut, where, for the first time, Siddhartha met his son, also named Siddhartha. Before Kamala took her last breath, she introduced the father of Siddhartha to his son. Siddhartha wanted his son to live with him, but he soon learned the little boy had been a spoiled kid under his mother's wing. Kamala had raised him in an environment filled with luxury, but he was blinded by his love for his son. He did not want to abandon him when he knew the boy's heart was already not kind. He feared if he left him on his own, with only the servants of Kamala taking care of him, he might not turn out to be a good person. Siddhartha continued to coax the boy with kindness and gentleness, but his father's vices were lost on the boy. He felt he was being held captive in his father's miserable hut. The boy said crude words to his father. He said he would rather be a bandit, a thief, than being humble, gentle, kind, and pious like his father. The next morning, when Vasudeva and Siddhartha woke up, the little boy, the ferry, and the silver and copper coins which were payment for being rowed across the river were gone. Siddhartha, distraught with worry for his child, wanted to go after him. He started building a raft. Vasudeva tried to hold him back by telling him that the boy does not want to be followed. Siddhartha, not heeding to Vasudeva's advice, still set out into the forest to search for his boy. On reaching the edge of the city, he recalled his life in the city and how he had come to despise it. And it was then he realized he was a fool in trying to help his son. He ought not to cling to him. Siddhartha continued on with his life as a ferryman, taking people across the river, some with their children, and his wounds continued to burn for a long time. He began to see that the worldly life was not futile. He began to understand these people whom he took across the river. Although he was near to perfection, he saw these people as his brothers. All the traits they had, all the qualities he termed childish, no longer seemed like childishness. He realized there was nothing they lacked except one trifle tiny thing that wise men and thinkers had over them: the awareness, the conscious idea, the unity of life. Siddhartha realized what he had been after for so long was nothing but the ability at every moment in the midst of life to think the thought of unity, to feel and breathe unity. His wound continued to burn one day. The burning was fierce, and he set out into the river to seek his son. He saw his reflection in the water. It seemed familiar to him. He saw his own father. Had he not forced his father to let him go? How he had gone off to never return. How long had it been since his father must have died alone without having seen his son ever again? The river laughed at his fate. Everything returned that had not been suffered through to the end and resolved. Siddhartha spoke to Vasudeva that day about the things they had never talked about. Vasudeva coaxed Siddhartha to listen to the river closer, and finally Siddhartha heard the sound of thousands of voices becoming one. Om. On this day bloomed a cheerfulness of wisdom. Who knows perfection on Siddhartha's face? Vasudeva told Siddhartha that now it was time for him to leave. I have awaited this moment for long. Farewell hut, farewell river, farewell Siddhartha. Govinda had heard of a ferryman who was considered a sage by many. He goes to the riverside in search of this ferryman. He once again fails to recognize his friend, realizing this only when Siddhartha addresses him by his name. They sail together towards Siddhartha's hut. Govinda questions Siddhartha and they start conversing. Govinda thinks Siddhartha's teachings to be foolishness. He compares his teachings to the exalted ones, Buddha, whose teachings he thought purer, clearer, and more understandable. But Siddhartha's body language was entirely different from his teachings. Never before, except for Buddha, had he encountered such a picture of purity, calm, cheerfulness, moderation, and holiness. In Govinda's perspective, Siddhartha had achieved what he desired to all along.